we probably will get a higher sales price with somebody who's represented by someone, and we'll make sure that the deal makes the finish line, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to happen. We want a closing to happen.
So, hi, this is Dave Steinberg, and welcome to the Mortgage is Made Easy podcast. Returning with my friend MJ Agostini. MJ is a fabulous broker in Connecticut, really one of the best I know. And we're talking about the impact on sellers of the new NAR settlement and what that means and how the buyer's agency piece relates to the seller and what their best advice is. MJ, take it away.
Hello, Dave. Thank you for the invite to your podcast. It's always a pleasure to visit with you and talk to your audience. Yeah, the new regulations that have come out have affected both buyers and sellers in the marketplace. And again, just as a short snippet, the theory behind the change in how we do business really stems from lawsuits that were brought against the real estate industry because sellers didn't have an opportunity to negotiate buyer agency fees in order to use the MLS. So in the old days, a listing agent would sit down with the seller and always negotiate a gross listing price, and then make a decision about how much of that listing price or listing commission would go to a buyer agency to bring in a buyer with a successful transaction. And these lawsuits said, look, we don't want to force the seller to commit to a fee perhaps prior to putting the house on the market. And they wanted the ability for that seller to have more flexibility on what they perhaps will pay a buyer's agent, and maybe make that decision once a contract came in instead of up front. So some of these strategies, so to speak, could be conducive to the seller, because there could be a buyer agent on the other side that says, hey, my buyer is going to pay me directly. I don't need compensation from you, but here's a really great offer. And that could benefit the seller by not having to pay an additional fee at the closing. But on the same token, the whole spirit of our industry right now has been, for every 10 buyers, there's one house. So you want, as a seller, you really want as many buyers as possible to come through that threshold. And in order to entice those buyers to get in, their agents, would like to know that they will have an opportunity to be compensated if they're not going to be compensated by their buyer directly. So many buyers, many agents, many buyers together will give you a really great support price and probably bid your property up higher than it would have ordinarily been if you only had one or two buyers.
So let's look at the possibilities from the seller's perspective, if you will. One possibility is that the buyer walks in alone without representation. What would you tell the seller in that situation? And what would you want as the realtor, as the selling agent? What would you want your seller to understand?
Well, when an unrepresented buyer comes into the picture, it can be a little bit like the Wild West, because as a listing agent, I prefer to only represent one party at a time. And unrepresented buyers can be dangerous to the process because they don't have anyone coaching them. They don't have anyone checking on paperwork, verifying their information. Certainly, as an unrepresented buyer coming in, they have no guidance as to what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. So we like to be able to say, look, Mr. Seller, this is an unrepresented buyer. Perhaps we can get somebody in our office to represent them so that will have a smoother transaction. We probably will get a higher sales price with somebody who's represented by someone, and we'll make sure that the deal makes the finish line, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to happen. We want a closing to happen. And unrepresented buyers, unless they're another real estate agent or an attorney or somebody who's really proficient in the real estate business, can be somewhat of an unpredictable scenario.
At the end of the day, the most important thing for the seller should be a smooth transaction with the highest possible net. Right?
That's correct.
And so if you have an unrepresented buyer, there's a risk that's presented, and therefore you have to address it. Now let's take the next possibility, and now you're at a listing presentation, and your seller says, I understand that I no longer have to pay the buyer's agent anymore. In fact, they never understood why I was paying the buyer's agent. What's your advice? What do you say, MJ?
Well, I went out on a listing presentation this afternoon and I had this discussion with the seller. Now, the seller has sold several houses, so he understands the value of having a buyer's agent represent a buyer. But many sellers don't. They are under the impression that they're paying double. They're paying for their listing agent and they're paying for their buyer's agent. However, if you take it down the road, as we know, the buyer brings the money to the closing. If it's not for the buyer's mortgage, there would be no money there. And somebody has to get the buyer to that particular point. And that's why a buyer's agent is so vital. So what we say to the seller is, look, you're paying the listing agent to market, prepare the house for sale, do all the negotiating and represent them. But the buyer's agent is also an integral part of that transaction. And if they come to the table and they're asking to get paid and you have a great offer on the table, then there's no reason why you would not want to pay them to get that great offer on the table. And there's assurances with that offer that they're being taken care of by a professional. And again, that we're going to end up at the finish line. So
with a smoother transaction and less risk of things going wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah. And though it's not in the same way it used to be on the MLS, but nevertheless, when you do, let's say, an open house and you can tell the realtors who come to view the property, my seller is going to pay 2% towards the buyer's commission, they're going to be more likely to bring people to the house because they see their path to compensation. And it's in that way, it's the same as the old system.
It really is. And this is just how it shows up on the closing disclosure. I think at the end of the day, that's basically what it is. It is, and it gives the seller more control over the process. But the buyer's agents are still going to get paid. They're going to get paid by the buyer, or they're going to get paid by the seller through the transaction. So It's not that the buyer's agents are going away. They're still going to be here. They're still going to be representing buyers, and the seller is still going to get that benefit of getting a super great offer because they've had so many agents that are competing for that one particular property.
MJ, thank you so much. Anything else you want to say?
No, I think sellers, don't be afraid of the marketplace. It's still a viable place for you, and you're still going to get lots of good offers. And it just allows you a little bit more flexibility in how the transaction is structured.
And at the end of the day, what counts most is how much money you make.
That's right.
You
At the
know, if you got two offers and, in two alternate universes, you had two offers. In one universe, you had no realtors involved in the transaction and you netted 500,000. And in the second universe, you had a buyer's agent and a seller's agent and you netted 550. I'd rather be in the situation where I net 550. And even if I have to pay some money out to some people to get there.
Yeah, and remember, the price is super important, but low liability, a manageable transaction, getting it to the finish line, stress-free, issue-free, and that's where all the professionals come in. The public, I think, sometimes doesn't realize how much negotiations just to go that behind the scenes impact the eventual outcome of the transaction.
Thank you so much, MJ. This has
Pleasure
been
to be with
wonderful.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dave.